Hi everyone, Elliot Jacobson here, and today I want to talk about how you can beat blackjack legally in ways that are not card counting. In fact, I'm going to give you 11 ways to do that. So just to sort of tell you the motivation for this, the very first video when I started making videos on this YouTube channel that I made was this video called 7 Reasons to Never Count Cards. So you can find that in this YouTube channel, and I'll link to it down below. And essentially this video just talked about all the different reasons that ordinary blackjack card counting is a bad idea. Now that doesn't mean that people don't want to be able to beat blackjack in a legal way. And so what I've done is put together a list of what I consider to be the top 11 methods to beat the game legally that are not card counting. So let's just go straight to that, and I'll show you what those methods are. So to begin with, when we start talking about beating blackjack, we always want to be focused on ways that are actually profitable. They're not some sort of mythological method like following trends or pattern progressions, leaving when the shoe goes cold or entering when it's hot, all those sorts of things. We're talking about scientifically based methods. These are things that actually work, that actually generate a mathematical edge over the house. So that is sort of the underpinning for each one of these methods, the basic thing you have to know that's really going on. So let's just get going. Number 1 method. This is shuffle tracking, and shuffle tracking simply means that we are going to follow along through the shuffle and hopefully identify where certain sorts of cards are. Now, ordinary blackjack card counting works because it understands that the high cards, the 10 value card and aces, are good for the player side, and that the low value cards are good for the house side. So if, for example, we're watching the table and we see a whole slug of high cards come out, and then we watch where those go into the discard tray, and then this shuffle procedure that's used by the casino is just very quick and dirty, and they aren't really paying attention very much, we might be able to follow that slug of good cards through the shuffle. It may get diluted a bit, but roughly speaking, we would know when to expect some good cards. Well, there's a lot to this method, and let me just say that with all of the methods I'm going to talk about here, there's a lot to them, and this is not going to be an exposition on the fine details. It's really an enumeration, so please just Google shuffle tracking if you want to learn more about that. That is the first method that I want to just say you can use to beat the game. All right, the next method is very similar to shuffle tracking. It also has to do with following cards through the shuffle procedure, and this is called ace-sequencing. And really all we're trying to do here is know where 1 or 2 aces are in the shuffle, in the shoe. And we'd like to have as close an estimate on where those aces end up as possible. So what is true is that if you have cards that are next to each other, and you follow cards that are next to each other through the shuffle, then if the shuffle procedure is not particularly complex, in particular does not have what's called a strip in it, then that so-called key card that predicts when the ace is going to come out will stay relatively close to the ace. This procedure has been used systematically against casinos that have weak shuffles, that have shuffles that don't have a strip in them, and it continues to go on to this day. This is ace-sequencing. You can actually find a book that was written about this topic if you want to read more on this. The next method is edge sorting. And edge sorting has to do with understanding that most playing cards have some very subtle asymmetries along the edges of them. And these asymmetries, if you look at some cards, you'll notice that, for example, diamonds on one side are different than diamonds on the other, or that maybe even the logo in the middle is asymmetric, or some other feature of the back of the card that allows you to identify when it's one direction versus another. And this allows cards to be sorted. This is how Phil Ivey beat Baccarat in England back in 2012 or 13. And this is actually used against blackjack as well. So if we sort the high cards, the 10 valued card and aces in one direction and all the other cards in the other direction, then there's a lot of information available to the player. Now, this has not necessarily been determined to be legal in all jurisdictions. You are essentially using a marked deck to play against the casino. But I mean, the casino is the one that's offering the marked deck to you. You're not marking the deck yourself. So it has not yet been found to be illegal in any jurisdiction either. But Phil Ivey, as we know, lost his lawsuit to recoup his winnings at Baccarat in England. All right, next method, hole carding. So this is a method of very serious professional advantage players where essentially during the shuffle procedure, they're simply looking for dealers that are sloppy and expose the down card as it's slid under the up card. So on the table, the last card that goes will be put under here. And sometimes with a sloppy dealer, they may expose that card on the way to it being put underneath. So being able to see the whole card lets you know, of course, what the dealer's got as his first two cards. And that can give you a huge edge, 10% or more over the house. And this is really one of the most common methods used by advanced advantage players. Now you have to learn all sorts of strategies for hole carding, and you may want to have a team there, somebody reading the cards with really good eyes and passing the information to the other players at the table. But this has been, at least in Nevada, it was ruled legal in the 1970s, I believe. And it is used internationally against blackjack. And I've never heard of a case where this has not been held up in court as a method that's allowed. Essentially, you are just using information freely available at the table. It's not your fault the dealer is sloppy. A variation on hole carding is called top carding. And top carding essentially has to do with a dealer who may be a bit fidgety. And so you may see this mostly in a pitch game rather than a shoe game. The dealer has the cards, he's holding the cards, and as he's holding them, he sort of takes his finger and he's just very nervously moving around the cards, waiting to see whether you want to hit or stand, and may expose a corner of the card to some seat at the table. And then that information can be relayed to the other players at the table by someone who has very keen eyes. All right, so that is top carding. Again, that will get you quite a large edge over the house if you can find a dealer who is exposing that card. Okay, next, skilled cutting. So skilled cutting is exactly what it sounds like. It is simply a method of placing a cut card at a very specific location in the deck. Now, just for fun, why don't you practice this at home and see whether you can, for example, choose 20 cards and see if you can put a card 20 cards from the bottom. You'll find that just within just a few minutes of practice, you'll be able to be a skilled cutter. It is really not as difficult as it sounds. It's one of the easier ways. Now, what do you do with that? Well, so for example, if you happen to know that the bottom card is an ace, then all you have to do is cut that card to a known location. You put the cut card 20 cards from the bottom. Then when the dealer does the cut, you now know that that ace is the 20th card. And again, just by a little bit of card steering, maybe you have a team at the table, you can drive that ace to your hand. If you happen to see that that bottom card is not an ace, it's a 5, for example, well, again, you can cut that 5 to the 20th location. And you know that's a card you want to drive typically to the dealer. If you could get it to be one of the first two cards for the dealer, or you may have a decision whether to double down or split. That by knowing that the 5 is the 20th card could improve your strategic decision. So skilled cutting is still used to this day, a very powerful method. Essentially, you're playing with one known card in the deck, and that's enough to get you an edge. Next method are side bets. So side bets come in a whole variety, from 21+3 to Lucky Ladies, Royal Match. So Many of these side bets can be card counted now. Typically, the maximum wager allowed to make on a side bet is $25, at least in the US, so there may not be a lot of profit there. But in some locations, you may find much higher wagers allowed on side bets. You may find side bets that are extraordinarily vulnerable, as was the Slingo side bet back a few years. So if you just pay attention to side bets, there are, for many of them, a customized card counting system. Others are vulnerable to shuffle tracking. So for example, if you follow Queen of Hearts through a shuffle, you may get an edge over lucky ladies. I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to do, but it's just an example. Next method, loss rebates. You probably heard about Don Johnson. If not, look him up on Google, not the actor. We're talking about the gambler. So this person got a 20% loss rebate incentive at 3 different casinos in Atlantic City back about 8 years ago. And what that meant is on any given day that he won, he got to keep his winnings. On any given day he lost, he was given 20% of his losses back. Now, if you just do a very simple-minded experiment, he was allowed to wager $100,000 a hand. And just picture that he either leaves, well, he will always leave after winning or losing $1 million. So that's only 10 chips if his chip is $100,000. And so his sessions could be very, very short. Sometimes it would take almost no time at all to win 100,000, or almost no time at all to win $1 million, or almost no time at all to lose $1 million. All right, well, blackjack is very close to an even game. So in the short run, that's roughly a 50-50 proposition, win or lose 10 chips. So what does that mean? Well, on the days that he won, he kept his $1 million. On the days that he lost his $1 million, but got 200,000 back. So half the time he won $1 million, half the time he lost 800,000, an average profit of about 100,000. So he very quickly accumulated a lot of winnings by exploiting this loss rebates. I have a lot about loss rebates on my website, advancedadvantageplay.com, including some spreadsheets that you can use. Loss rebate, you can beat the roulette or baccarat, blackjack, craps, pretty much any game that you're allowed to make large wagers. And if you're given a large enough loss rebate, you can beat that game. Split for less. This is a subtle method, but essentially what we're talking about here are casinos that have a special rule that when the tables get very crowded, you're allowed to wager from off the table and follow the bet and play of one of the players on the table. And this, for example, in California casinos, at a lot of the card houses, there's this rule, but in some Asian casinos as well that get very crowded, they have this back betting allowed. Now the problem comes with a split hand. Does the back better have to also split his wager into both hands? Well, that's a challenging thing to uphold, that the person who has put down their wager then has to walk up to the table and add additional money. So many casinos allow the back bettor to simply leave his money on one of the two hands that the dealer was, that the player was splitting. So if you think about certain situations that you might have had a negative edge by having to match your wager, you no longer have that drain on your bankroll by splits that essentially are made in negative EV situations. So it does not change the house edge by very much, but it does give back enough to the player's side so that in some situations you can get a very small edge over the house. And there are teams internationally that use this method. Okay, marketing and promotions. Well, this works for all games and all casinos, but blackjack in particular has this notorious 2-to-1 blackjack pays promotion that seems to pop up every now and then as someone in marketing thinks, wouldn't that be a great thing to do to get people into the casino? You may see all sorts of rule variations clothed in in things called happy hours. You may get match play coupons, extra point days, promotional chips. There may be giveaways, drawing tickets you can earn, shows, rooms, meals, and so on. Max Rubin wrote a book called Comp City many years ago that talked about exactly how you could play to exploit marketing and promotions and simply just play basic strategy and still beat the house just by virtue of all the stuff you accumulated. Now, casinos have gotten very, very stingy, very tight in the last few years, but that doesn't mean it isn't still possible if you just pay attention to certain situations. Certain lucrative opportunities still come up all the time. All right, and the last one is to play against blackjack novelty games. So new versions of blackjack are coming out all the time. There are game inventors who just full-time what they do for a living is invent games, and these games will get trials at casinos. And some of these games are not as well thought out as others. They may have special vulnerabilities, but there are also variants of blackjack that are on the market today that have vulnerabilities, and I would single out Spanish 21. So that game in particular is like blackjack, but you take all the tens out of the decks, but then you have all sorts of extra incentive rules for the player side to make up for the deficiency of tens that were removed. So it turns out that, for example, you can use ordinary blackjack card counting against Spanish 21, and it is every bit as effective as it would be in an ordinary blackjack game. The difference being that the dealers and the pit and surveillance may not be watching Spanish 21 with the same sort of keen eye that they're watching their ordinary blackjack tables. So you may be able to use just a typical card counting methodology against one of these blackjack variants and find yourself with a comfortable advantage and have none of the downside that using card counting against blackjack gives you. So yeah, if you have a blackjack novelty game, always look at it. Think about all the things that the person who invented the game may not have thought about. That may be a great opportunity for you. So that's it. Those are my 11 legal ways to beat blackjack. And again, I want to encourage you to watch that video, that very first video in this channel that I posted, 7 reasons to never count cards. From the surveillance side, I hope this video has been helpful so that you can understand that you may be spending too much time looking for card counters when there are all these other ways that people are beating your blackjack. So you definitely want to pay attention when somebody is doing something funny at the table and they're not counting cards. There is a long list of things they may be doing. So, all right, a couple more things. Please visit my website, advancedadvantageplay.com, for all sorts of other fun things to look at that are advantage play or gambling related. And also, please subscribe to this channel. I would very much appreciate it, Advanced Advantage Play. So that's it. This is Elliot Jacobson. See you later.